Welcome on in to the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. Brutal game for the Running Utes last night. They lost 71-36 to the number 7 Houston Cougars in Houston. Weather delay forced that game from Tuesday to Wednesday, and that didn't help much at all. That one was over before it began. With the way it played out, I think Utah finished the game. I think they started the game with a couple turnovers, and ended the game with a couple turnovers, and that was the story of the game. Turnovers, just plagued by turnovers. And so we'll talk. We'll break down that game on this episode. Just a quick rundown here before I get to yammering about everything else. But a quick rundown of the topics on this episode. Like I mentioned, Utah lost in Houston 71-36 to the Cougars. Talk about that one. We'll do a deep dive on that one. Maybe not a super deep dive, but we'll talk about some things. Utah women's basketball got back into the win column after dropping 2 straight. They knocked off Kansas 79-61. Gianna Needkins with 30 points, 10 assists, and 2 rebounds short of a triple-double. Pretty impressive stuff from her. Utah just got back to playing good, clean basketball, their brand of ball, and this was a bit of a get-right game, and I think an important timing. I think important to get this one, the timing with Saturday's contest going on the road to Provo against BYU. Needed to, not that, BYU, they are playing better basketball, but BYU, Utah should be able to take care of business in that one, but still good to get right and correct some things, address some things, and head down south to take on the Cougars this Saturday. So good for women's basketball to get back into the win column, and hopefully they can keep riding that momentum this weekend and into next week as well. After I talk Utah basketball, I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to highlight the top returning players for Utah going into 2025. And I'll start today. So I'll do this. I'll do offense, defense, and then just overall talk about the top players on the roster and that sort of stuff. But today I'll start on the defense side of the ball, just kind of given the fact that there are way more returning players on that side of the ball than the offensive side. And so the offense is going to take a little bit more projecting and that sort of stuff. So we'll talk about the defense today. And then also, I want to take a look at Utah's completely overhauled running back room and do a better job of breaking down the running back room than I did the quarterback room on the last episode. So I want to go a little bit more in depth, reasons why I'm optimistic about the running back room and sort of the roles I see with the guys that they're bringing in, what's left to be done with the running back room and all that sort of stuff. So let's get to it. No guests on the show today, just me. So let's dive into last night's loss to the number 7 Houston Cougars. Utah turned it over consistently throughout the game. They finished with 24 turnovers overall. That led to 29 direct points for Houston off of those turnovers. And, that's just not going to keep you in many games. I mean, if you turn it over 24, 25, 26 times in a game, it doesn't matter if they're Houston, it could be Colorado, ASU. It could be anybody in this league. You're going to get beat when you turn it over at that rate. So Utah's got to do a much better job of protecting the basketball. Oh, excuse me. Why am I saying 24 turnovers? 26 turnovers with 29 points off of those turnovers for Houston. And so, Utah doubled up. So they turned it over twice as many times as they put the ball through the hoop. The Utah finished 13 of 43 from the field, 5 of 17 from three-point range, and 5 of 12 from the free throw line. Utah just did not look comfortable, did not look prepared, ready for that game in any sort of way. And I think the turnovers were the most obvious issue for Utah in last night's game. You can't turn it over 26 times. Um, again, Houston scored 29 direct points off of those turnovers, which is only 7 fewer points than Utah scored in the entire game. And like that's just you're digging yourself a gigantic hole with those turnovers. And with the turnovers, Utah just struggled with the lack of airspace that Houston defenders conceded. Like Houston was just up in Utah, forcing them into just uncomfortable situations and took away. They were airtight on ball handlers. Rarely gave up much breathing room for Mike Sheravance, for Miro Little and Hunter Erickson, and just Utah. They've faced that sort of defensive pressure in a couple of games this season, but not to that extent. Houston was just on a completely different level. Even Iowa State. Iowa State is a very, very good defensive team, but Houston, they are just on a different level defensively. Watching that game. Obviously the athleticism, but they are so sharp with their defensive rotations, with understanding where opponents are trying to get the ball in. With Utah specifically, they tried to get it inside. It seemed like any time Lawson Lovering caught the ball and turned to face the rim, there was a Houston defender, coming across in help to swipe at the ball, and that led to a couple turnovers. This group it's a veteran group. It's a group that's been together for a couple years now, and you can just see that continuity. They just have, the talent, the athleticism, and the know-how, the experience. I think that for me was the biggest takeaway from last night's game, was just watching and almost marveling at how good Houston was, particularly on that defense side of the ball. It was, it was just a masterclass in defense. And unfortunately, Utah was the victim in that game. So Utah's got to bounce back. Obviously, when you suffer a loss like that, it's going to serve as a wake-up call. And I think for Utah, winning 3 games consecutively, they were probably feeling a little good, but you can't get too comfortable in the Big 12. Not only does Utah need to raise their level of performance, they need to raise their level of consistency from game to game. You can't have these highs and these lows. You've got to become more consistent. You got to raise your floor, as much as it is, raising your ceiling, improving the talent. You got to raise your floor, and you got to become a more consistent program. And so, in that sort of vein, I think the deeper issue with Utah is that Houston they simply looked like they were on a completely different tier of athleticism and talent. Utah simply looked outmatched in terms of, the athletes on the floor, the talent that these players possessed. And Utah's up the talent. Like they brought in some really good players in the transfer portal. Obviously, Ezra Sarr and Mike Sheravance, and all those guys. They've upped the talent in the program. And I do think, maybe there was a bit of a mental or emotional toll. Again, talking about getting comfortable after 3 straight losses, feeling like maybe you've arrived, that sort of thing. Like that's the sort of stuff you've got to eliminate, because again, you can get beat, and you can get beat pretty bad. And so, maybe Utah wasn't at their best. I will acknowledge that, but again, that just speaks to the fact that you've got to raise your floor. And so still, there are going to be more games in the future that follow the rivalry game, more games against top contenders in the Big 12. Utah has to, raise their level, their floor. Obviously, you've got to add talent to the top, but you got to raise your floor. So Utah has to continue to add athleticism, add talent to the roster. And Craig Smith, he said as much today in his media availability. He acknowledged the fact that they have to continue to level up the talent across the entire roster. I think it's also important, again, I've already kind of alluded to it, but I think it's important to highlight Houston's continuity. Utah, or Houston, they haven't been an elite recruiting program. They've been top 50, um, but outside of this 2025 class that's ranked number 2, their last 3 classes, so 2024, 2023, and 2022, were ranked as follows. They had the 49th class in 24, the 22nd ranked class in 23, and the 44th ranked class in 2022. That surprised me. I was genuinely surprised by that, just given the success that Houston has had over the last few years. And I think that that's encouraging for Utah in a sense that, okay, we don't have to be a top 25 recruiting program to contend in the Big 12. And I think with basketball, it's totally different than football because you're just dealing with fewer numbers, and that can create greater variancy between classes. Like Baylor right now, I think they've got one commit and have like the 71st ranked class in 2025. But you look at that commit, it's a 97 rated 4-star prospect, and you're just like, okay, they've still got a pretty darn good player. And so, there is just a little bit of greater variance between football and basketball. I think just given the scale, the larger number of programs that compete at a high level, the larger number of prospects, it's probably if you expand it out, right? I think a top 25 football class is akin to what, like a 45 ranked class. I hope that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is, college basketball, if you're talking top 45 class in the country, it's akin to a top 25 class, just given the greater number that you're dealing with, both in terms of prospects and programs. So I think, Utah, they haven't recruited at a great level, but they're close to that mark. They finished 59th this past cycle, so you're almost there, but you had the 91st ranked class a couple years ago and the 68th ranked class 3 years ago. You've got to continue to close that gap. And I think more importantly for Utah in this big picture and addressing this, again, using Houston as an example, it's not that they're recruiting at a good level, they're bringing in good talent, but they're retaining that talent. So you go back to the 2022 class, you're looking at Jarris Walker, who was a 5-star, a one-and-done prospect, went on to the NBA. But Terrence Arsenault, who we saw last night in the game, he was the second highest rated player in their 2022 class. Let's look at their 2023 class. Joseph Tugler, who was the forward giving Utah fits inside, he was the headliner in their 2023 class. So he's been in the program now a couple years. A couple other guys, Damian Dunn and LJ Cryer, were recruited in that 2023 class. So they've been with the program a couple of years now. And so, Houston has not only recruited good talent, but they've been able to hang on to it and build this culture, build this competitive culture. And I think for Utah, that's so important. It's a mixture of recruiting and retaining. That is the fix for Utah. You've got to be able to recruit better talent, but you've got to be able to retain it as well. This is a big picture, big process type of fix for Utah, and I think everybody understands that. You're encouraged by what Utah brought in this past cycle, like I mentioned with Sheriff Jump, Sassar, and Keanu Dawes. You're really encouraged by what Utah has in those guys. Jake Wellene taking a big step forward this season. And so it's important to, add key pieces in each and every class. Not every player is going to hit, but you've got to be able to add key pieces in each and every class and then hang on to them, for 2-3 years if possible. So that's the big picture key for Utah, and that's obviously not a quick fix. And with Baylor coming into Salt Lake City, on Saturday, When you're talking about the athleticism of Houston, the defensive precision that they have on, in that program, Baylor is very similar. They've got top tier talent. They've got guys that have been in the program a couple years. How does Utah counterpunch? How do they? Because they're not suddenly become more athletic between the Houston game and the Baylor game. How do they counterpunch? These super athletic, super talented teams, and they've got to become mentally sharper. Continue refining their understanding of the offense, execute with greater precision, without hesitating, without second guessing. They've obviously got to play with more force, as Craig Smith likes to say all the time. But I do think, the way to counter these athletic teams is you've got to raise your basketball IQ, and that's sort of the process right now. And that is always going to be the process, with college basketball is, you're constantly trying to develop these guys, their understanding of the game, their understanding of what you're trying to do, the offense that you're trying to execute. And so this is part of the process. Utah's got to continue to, coach these guys up, demand cleaner execution, and that sort of stuff. And I do think, Baylor got a good win over Kansas State last night as well. But Baylor has looked vulnerable at times. And so I think for Utah, you're obviously going to need a tremendous bounce back performance. And I think, obviously the physicality, the athleticism, those things are going to be important. Having the home crowd behind you is going to be important. And so I hope the Utah fans continue to show up for this game. Look, losing 70-36 is brutal. That's a tough way to lose. But this team still needs that fan support. And I think they still have enough where they can compete, with these top programs at home, at least. On the road is a different animal right now, but I think with the fan base behind them that they can compete and they can get a couple of valuable wins at home. But they're going to need, obviously, a much better performance, both in terms of protecting the basketball and just executing cleaner on that side of the ball as well. So, and I'll dive more into Utah's recruiting efforts and this cycle and beyond in terms of their mindset, their approach. I think obviously for Utah, it's going to be a heavy emphasis on the transfer portal because that's sort of the quickest way to address the impact players that you need. And so we'll dive more into that on a future episode and do more of that. But switching gears to football now, I want to talk about my top 5 returning defenders for Utah in 2025. So I'm going to start actually with my number 1 player and work down my list instead of the other way around. So I'm going to start. I'm going to give you some numbers, some grades of 2 players. And this is just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm thinking here. All right. So player A finished with a 61.2 defensive grade. He tallied 54 tackles, 30 stops. And what is a stop? It is a tackle that results in a failure for the offense. So you're talking about offensive efficiency. It's a tackle that keeps them behind the chains, essentially. Keeps them in an inefficient situation. So 30 stops. So 30 tackles that kept the offense behind the chains, essentially. A 19.4% missed tackle rate, 28 pressures, 4 sacks, 1 interception, 1 pass deflection, 1 TD allowed in coverage, and 1 forced fumble. So again, 61.2 PFF grade on the defense side of the ball, 54 tackles, 30 stops, a 19.4% missed tackle rate, 28 pressures, 4 sacks, 1 interception, 1 pass deflection, 1 TD allowed in coverage, and 1 forced fumble. So that's player A. Player B, 72.1 PFF grade on the defense side of the ball, 63 tackles, again, 30 stops, a 20.2% missed tackle rate, 20 total pressures, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 4 pass deflections, 0 TDs allowed in coverage, and 1 forced fumble. So again, 72.1 PFF grade on defense, 63 tackles, 30 stops, 20.2% missed tackle rate, 20 total pressures, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 4 pass deflections, 0 TDs allowed in coverage, 1 forced fumble, and 1 fumble recovery. I apologize. So if you said that those 2 players were Jack Kelly and Lander Barton, you would be correct. Now, Lander Barton was actually player B with the 72.1 PFF grade, and BYU's Jack Kelly was player A with the 61.2 PFF grade. So I think there should be a lot of excitement about Lander Barton. And I think Lander Barton is my top returning defender for Utah. I think, we all recognize that Lander didn't look his normal self this past season. He looked a tad slow, looked a little sluggish. Obviously, the missed tackles was a big issue. I thought an interesting revelation from the offseason kickoff press conference that we got a couple weeks ago was when Morgan Scalley shared that Lander was still rehabbing his injury from the previous season, and I thought that was interesting. Just given the injury secrecy that Utah has. I thought that was important to highlight, was that Morgan acknowledged that Lander was not 100% this past season. And I think, if you give that the sort of credence that it deserves and acknowledge it, I think you come away feeling much better about Lander's performance, that he went out there not at 100% and gutted it out. And I think what's really exciting is the fact that, after that Houston game, and that Houston game was a rough one for Lander. I think we all remember that game, with him in particular. He got back in that mode after that game. His final 4 games of the season, he earned PFF grades of 69.2 against BYU, 69.6 against Colorado, 67.5 versus Iowa State, and 78.8 against UCF. I think to finish the season in that manner on the upswing, with positive grades in each of the last 4 games, and you're probably thinking 69, 68, that's not good. It is. So the way I gauge PFF, the best way that I can recommend it, I can explain it. A 65 to 75 is a good grade. That's a good player. 75 to 85, that's a very good player. 85 to 95, that's an elite player, and anything 95 and up is otherworldly. That Ashton Genty of the world, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, otherworldly is 95 and up. So good player. That you're getting good play from 65 to 75 grade. That's a good player. So for him to have struggled the way that he did, throughout most of the season, understanding that he was not 100%, but then, to turn it on in the final month of the season and to finish the way that he did, making the plays that he did, I think is pretty significant. And obviously, I mentioned on the previous episode, PFFs, how they sort of, what they're trying to highlight with their grades is impact. They're trying to highlight who actually impacts plays, makes the impact plays. And I think for Lander to finish as strongly as he did, I think is going to be a big confidence boost for him. He made a positive impact. He was making plays in those final games. That interception against Colorado, that was not, Shedeur Sanders didn't throw it to him, under pressure, under duress. That was simply just Lander Barton recognizing the route, undercutting it and making a good play on the ball. Getting to the quarterback, forcing a fumble, recovering it. Those types of plays are going to be rewarded because you're making the impact. You're impacting the play, and instead of just a terrible throwaway type of pass that lands in your gut, I think Lander really made genuinely positive impact plays in those final 4 games. And so I think for him moving into the offseason on the upswing, on the positive note that he did, I think will be a big thing for him. And as he gets, another year to rehab, another year to recover, another year to prepare for a greater, more important role next season, right? Taking on that responsibility of being the guy, I think having another year to do that, I think will be big for him. So Lander Barton, my top returning defender for Utah. Number 2, I very easily could have put him number 1, and he has a very strong case to be the top returning defender for Utah in 2025. Because when Utah has a dynamic CB1 in the secondary, it just does so much for this defense. I felt like Smith Snowden played at a consistently good level throughout this past season and then flashed some elite playmaking skills that I believe he's going to be he's going to make more consistent this season. I think he's going to raise his standard of play this upcoming season. He displayed really quick IDing and reaction skills, highlighted by his interception against Utah State, where they're going to the ground, in the end zone, and the reaction skills to take that ball away as they're going down to the ground, to see it and quickly just react in the manner that he did is one thing. But then against UCF, to see that play develop to come across the field, across the formation, and to take that the other way in the way that he did also speaks to those reaction skills. So he flashed the playmaking skills, but he played consistently throughout the season, played a stingy brand of coverage, and limited opposing quarterbacks to 41% completion percentage on the year. The key for him, he did give up 3 touchdowns. Now, one of those was against Oklahoma State in soft coverage and that sort of thing. And so, you've got to eliminate those touchdowns, and that's going to be a point of emphasis for him. But Snowden showed a lot this past season, and I think he's truly ready to take on that, CB1 mantle where, he's going to continue to operate out of the slot, but he's going to play a lot outside. He's going to, take on the opposing wide receiver 1, that sort of matchup, and I think he's primed for a big season. So, if you want to make Smith Snowden, if you want to say Smith Snowden is your top guy returning on the defensive side of the ball for Utah this season, I have no problem with it. He has a very strong case to do that. And I think, honestly, with his role expanding this season, he very well could be the top defender for Utah next season without question. Up next, my number 3 player. He was actually the top rated defender according to PFF, and that's Teo Johnson. And I think Teo was actually pretty impressive to me this season in his new position, in his new role at free safety. Just genuinely surprised at his level of physicality, just kind of given how lean he is. He showed elite range at that free safety spot. And I think it's important to clarify, range is not just how much space you can defend behind you, it's also the space in front of you. And there were a couple of moments this past season, I'm thinking of a play against Colorado where he's dropping back, he's in his drop, and he comes up the field and makes a big time. He either blew up the play or made a big tackle that ended up in an incompletion. The wide receiver dropped it, but just he displayed such great range, and that's obviously key number 1 to playing free safety in Utah's defense. Just given the the love for man coverage and playing some cover one, playing cover three. You've got to have a guy in that middle of the field that can cover a lot of ground. And Teo Johnson showed that he can do that. I think what's really encouraging is Teo Johnson finished with 13 stops this past season, which again, those stops are tackles that result in a failure for the defense. And when you go back and you look at some of the greats at that spot, 2019, Julian Blackmon, he finished with 12 stops that season. 2016, Marcus Williams, he finished with 13 stops. And I think for him, for Teo, obviously adding some weight is going to be key because both Marcus Williams and Julian Blackmon, the key to their success and why they've made it to the NFL and have lasted in the NFL for as long as they have now, is that they were such sure tacklers. And, I mentioned that I was impressed by the level of physicality that Teo brought to the field. Given his slight frame, he still ended up with 13 missed tackles on the year, and that's a number that has to come down. Marcus Williams, going back to his 2016 campaign, finished with 7 missed tackles on the year. He was as sure a tackler as you can find in that position. So if Teo can cut his missed tackles in half, or at least get that to single digits, I think will be big for him. But love the range, love the potential to in terms of just him getting more comfortable in that role. Now he's got a year playing free safety under his belt. What sort of steps forward does he take this season? I'm really encouraged, thinking what sort of leap he can make going into 2025 with this year under his belt, because he played a really good brand of ball in year one. Again, the top graded defender according to PFF with an 83.7 grade, primarily due to his 86.7 coverage grade, which again speaks highly of his range at free safety. And so for him, I think not only cutting down the missed tackles, but also becoming more of a playmaker. 1 interception, 5 pass breakups. Need to up those numbers, right? Need to up those numbers, and I think Teo is very capable of that. So yeah, my number 3 player, and again, you could argue he's got a case for the top spot as well. So really excited about those top 3. Number 4, getting into the trenches. My number 4 player returning for Utah is Logan Fano. Considering the quick turnaround from his ACL injury he suffered in week 5 of the 2023 season, the level of play that Fano maintained throughout this season in his return from that injury deserves a little more acknowledgement. He wasn't generating a ton of pressure on the opposing quarterbacks, and that's obviously job number 1 of the defensive ends actually it's not job number 1. It's a big task for defensive ends in this defense, but I think I just don't know how many defensive ends 10 months post ACL injury would generate pressures at an elite rate. And so, I thought Logan played a brand of football that was encouraging to see, because he played technically sound ball throughout the year. He didn't have the juice, didn't have the comfort, the confidence. I don't know. Obviously, returning from an injury like that, it's pretty significant, and you're obviously going to do all that you can to protect yourself. And I thought Logan played a safe brand of football, a technically sound brand of football. He's getting he's engaging with the offensive tackle. He's keeping the offensive lineman off of him. He's trying to disengage from blocks and that sort of stuff. We saw a lot of that from him this season, and rarely was he ever rarely did he lose a play. Did he make a lot of plays? He made his fair share this season, but I think he tried to eliminate bad plays. Just again, considering the fact that he was returning from an ACL injury, I thought he played a smart brand of ball this season. And what I'm excited about is the fact that he made it through the season playing the brand of ball that he did, and he got more comfortable, becoming more aggressive as the season wore on. We started to see those flashes of that early 2023 Logan Fano where he was on a tear. I think he opened up the season with 4 sacks, 4.5 sacks maybe. He was on a similar pace as Jonah Ellis was to start the season in 2023, and we know what that resulted in for Jonah Ellis, right? 14 sacks, just a high number of pressures. Logan was on a similar pace that same year, and I think for him to get this season under his belt in his return from his ACL injury and now move forward similar to Lander Barton, right? Finishing the season on a positive note in terms of the plays that he made, the impact that he had, and now getting another year to recover, to rehab, and then take that next step as a player. I'm really excited for Logan Fano. I'm not going to forecast that he's going to be Jonah Ellis of 2023, but I feel confident that Logan Fano is going to be, a difference maker for Utah next season. So he's my number 4 player. Number 5, I'm actually really excited about this. Dallas Vakalahi is my number 5 top returning defender for Utah. I thought year 1 was super impressive for Dallas. To return home from his mission and work his way into the rotation at defensive tackle as prominently, as he did, was pretty impressive. Just considering again the guys that were in front of him. Obviously there were injuries in that, but I thought Dallas, earned those reps. And in his 250 reps that he played, he finished with 10 pressures, 2 sacks, and 10 tackles, all of which qualified as defensive stops. So he made plays. He didn't have a large number of missed tackles, which not every defensive tackle on Utah's roster could say that last year. And I think for Dallas, right, he's a bigger body at 6'2", 310 pounds. I think for him, getting a year in the system, getting another year in the strength and conditioning program, I'm really excited for what he's going to look like next year. I think year 1 was a success for him, and moving into year 2, he's gonna take a good positive step forward, and he's gonna have to, he's gonna have to step up in a big way. I think, for him though, having Aliki Vamahi back, having that veteran body next to him, and having a Jonah Leia and a couple other guys coming into the program that I think can help make an impact as well. I think Dallas is set up to be a really, really positive impact player for Utah's defense next year. So a couple other guys I want to mention. Obviously, John O'Hall. I actually had him number 5, but Wade went back and forth between him and Dallas. Obviously, ultimately went with Dallas, but I think John O'Hall is primed for a big step forward, getting his body where it needed to be, getting up to 230, 235 now. Just the athleticism that he played with, the pop in the pads that you could see he hit with force. He needs to become more technically sound as a tackler, and he's got the frame to do it. He's got the long arms. He's got the wide body. I think he'll be really, really good. And now that he's transitioned to linebacker, I'm excited for him. I think he's going to be an impact player for Utah. And then Elijah Scooby Davis. I thought his progress and growth from where he began last season to where he finished, I thought he became just more comfortable playing in the secondary. He's a key piece to that defense secondary and gives you a good floor to work with as you integrate all of these other players that you brought into the program. So really like what Utah is bringing back on the defense side of the ball. And they've got not only proven guys, but guys with plenty of room still left in their game, plenty of potential to tap into to take a big step forward. So I'm excited about that. All right, let's shift gears, talk about the running back room. Obviously, Utah had to completely remake this room. They brought in five new running backs, starting in the high school class with Daniel Bray and Racing Guillory, coming out of Texas. Two guys that I think provide a lot of optimism for the future of the running back position. Are they going to be ready to contribute in year one? I don't know that I'm ready to go there yet. Maybe Daniel Bray is, in terms of just being a change of pace type of back with his speed and his athleticism. I think, he could potentially earn a role. I think it's important to understand Racing Guillory, given the fact that, he was a high profile recruit, he reclassified from the 2026 class. So he is going to be a youngin', much like Mekhi Bernard, who came in a year younger than his classmates. He didn't necessarily reclassify, but same age. I think Racing Guillory is going to be a guy that, probably has to take, be patient with. He's going to have to take his time, develop. He's going to need a year to mature physically. Maybe he comes in and impresses right away, but I think just kind of given his age and where he's at in his physical development, I think, don't be surprised if he needs a year to acclimate to the collegiate level, because he is going to be younger than everybody else on the field. So those two, but still having those two, bringing those two in is significant for Utah. And then with what they've done in the transfer portal, bringing in Wayshawn Parker, bringing in Naquari Rogers from New Mexico, and Devin Green from UNLV, I like what Utah's done so far. Kyle Whittingham mentioned that they still are going to add another running back. They want to get to 6 scholarship running backs, and I think that's going to be super important. Obviously, they took a swing on Rachel Faison out of Utah State, and if you can add a player like that, you're obviously going to do it. And I think they gave they gave a they took a swing at it, but just weren't able to get it done. And I think there are probably obvious reasons for that. But still, to bring in Wayshawn Parker, Naquari Rogers, and Devin Green through the transfer portal, I think gives you a good foundation in the running back room. You've got Wayshawn Parker coming off a freshman season in which he ran for almost 750 yards. I think with an increased workload, he can push 1,000 yards, and he's probably going to get an increased workload, at Utah, just given the fact that, Kyle Whittingham wants to run the ball, and Jason Beck and Devin Dampier at quarterback. You're going to have, plenty of options, plenty of read option situations. And I think too, I'm so excited for Devin Dampier for many reasons, but one reason that will benefit the running back room at Utah is the fact that with Devin Dampier running the read option, that's going to hold off the backside defenders, because if not, you've got Dampier that's going to make you pay. And Utah hasn't had that threat for at least a couple years now. And I think that's going to help kind of alleviate some of just the easy crash downs that defense has had in defending the Utah run game, because there wasn't that threat to hold off the backside defender. And so, Wayshawn certainly benefited from that same sort of threat with John Mateer at Washington State. And I think, again, with an increased workload, we're talking about a Wayshawn Parker that can potentially get to 1,000 yards as a sophomore. And I think that's so important to keep in mind. He was a freshman last year. He's going into year 2. He's going to get stronger. He's going to get quicker. He's going to become more confident and comfortable in what he's doing. I think there should be a lot of excitement around Wayshawn. And obviously there is. Utah fans are super excited about him, and I think it's all warranted. I think he's coming into an offense that is going to really, really help his game, and an offensive line that is going to be geared to the run game as well, and I think that's going to be super exciting as well. And then, so you've got Wayshawn that's going to be your workhorse. I think Naquari Rogers is going to be your primary backup. And what's actually super encouraging is you look at what Naquari Rogers ran for. I think he ran for like 375 yards, something like that. Not eye-popping numbers, but he earned an 82.4 PFF grade, and that says something, right? I love PFF because I know that they're watching games. I know that they review games. They've got 500, 600 analysts. They have a giant workforce that genuinely watches these games, and they are tallying up, positive impacts on each and every play. I shouldn't say each and every play, but they're doing enough where they're reviewing games, reviewing impact, and so to see Nacori Rodgers with an 82.4 grade, that's not a mistake. He is making a genuinely positive impact when he's on the field. Limited opportunities. He's behind Eli Sanders at New Mexico, and they also had, another running back in the mix. I think Javen Jacobs was his name. But Nacori Rodgers, makes a positive impact when he's on the field. And I think to have him behind Wayshawn will be good. Devin Green, who was actually the high school teammate of Wayshawn Parker at Grant Union, he's going to be a guy, again, a freshman this past year, didn't put up didn't tally much production this past season. I think he finished with about 150 yards. But I think he can be the type where you need a physical running back. You need that sort of runner. I think Devin Green can be that. And to have those three, and then to add another one in the spring cycle, it'll be interesting to see what sort of running back they elect to bring in, what type of back they want to bring in. Do they go for a bigger back? Do they go for more athleticism? You've got three guys right now from the transfer portal alone that are all 5'10", 205, 208, 210 pounds. How much bigger, what sort of adjustments do they make physically? What sort of changes do they go through? Does Jason Beck want them in that 205, 210 pound range? Do they want them to add size? Really fascinated to see what sort of evolution they go through, and then also, again, what sort of running back do they target come the spring cycle? Do they go the JUCO route? I know they've got their eyes on a couple JUCO backs. Do they go that route? That may be the route that they go to. And so we'll see. But really excited about the running back room for Utah. It's been tough sledding the past 2 seasons, just kind of given the issues at quarterback and the issues with the offense in general. I think given the fact that you have a bona fide dual threat quarterback with an offense that is geared towards the run game, an offensive line that is also going to be geared more towards the run this season, I think you got to feel really optimistic about this running back room. And so, super excited about this group, and it'll be fun, like I said, to kind of see what they look like this spring. Hopefully we get to watch spring ball. We'll obviously get the red and white game, but really excited about this group and the potential addition whenever that comes this spring, just to kind of finish out this room. So that's today's episode. I appreciate everybody for continuing to listen to me yammer on. Going to continue on with previewing these groups. We're going to look at the top 5 returners on offense, and then we'll get into just top 5, top 10 players projections next season as well. Super excited about it all. Appreciate you all. This has been Steve Bartle and the Utah Blockcast signing off.